elders, past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people present. My name's Conrad Pearce, and I'm a participant of the International Space University's Southern Hemisphere Space Program for 2017, and together with my fellow participants, we're here to present our white paper to you. A few announcements first. Should there be an emergency, there are 2 emergency exits, one you came through and one at the back. Just leave through those doors and assemble on the grassed area outside. We will also be using lighting today, so the lights may go off and on for a short period of time, so just be aware of that. And also, if I could ask if you could please put your mobile phones to silent. So welcome guests. Welcome invited guests, including Professor Brenton Dancy from the University of South Australia, Mr. Michael Davis from the Satellite Industry Association of Australia, Mr. Nicola Sassanelli from Defence SA, and Mr. Nick Stacey from the DSTG. Also welcome to the UniSA faculty, the ISU faculty, ISU alumni, ISU participants, and all of you online watching our live webcast. We were instructed on the 9th of January, when the program started, by Juan and David to do a white paper investigation. This investigation was on small satellites in the global south. It also included 2 very high altitude balloon launches, which included Earth observation and telecommunication small satellite payloads. There are 39 participants in the program today, and over the last 5 weeks they've been working very hard to work on this white paper, and we're all proud to present this paper to you today. The paper essentially is on the socio-economic benefits of the small satellite revolution for nations in the global south. So for today's proceedings, they will centre around a rocket launch, delivering small satellites into space. We are fortunate to have the stakeholders of these small satellite launches, and they will be with us during the presentation. They will participate as panel experts in panel sessions both before and after the launch. These sessions will provide you information on why they were making the launch of these small satellites, the benefits they're getting, and the recommendations should you decide to do the same. Before you leave here today, you will have a clear understanding of what you need to think about and what you need to do with regards to policy, education, government, and private enterprise, so you too can be a part of the small satellite revolution. Let's begin.
Pocket Cube, a perfect example of the progress of the satellite industry. Ladies and gentlemen, we've made quite progress over the last 40 to 50 years in the way we utilize this technology. I'm here with you today to share you the amazing opportunities of small satellites. So small, yet so elegant that it fits in the palm of my hands. So small, yet so powerful that it fits within my pocket. So small, yet so powerful that it has the strength to compete with satellites such as Envy. Yes, Envy is bigger, but with a constellation of small satellites, we can produce and we can be just as effective. Gone are the days where bigger meant better. Gone are the days where the little guy was always stepped on. Gone are the days where smaller meant less. So I'm trying to tell you guys that now is the time to act. Small satellites are not a thing of the future. They are here, they are present, and we need to be aware. We need to take advantage of all they have to offer. Now is the time for us to realize the revolution is going. We do not want to be left behind. We should allow for all countries in the global south to take effect and use this to the best of our ability. Now is the time for you guys to be informed. It is time for us to take a decision.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning everyone. We are now live here at University of South Australia Mission Control for Aurora 1 rocket launch. I am Dr. Ashok Narayanamurthy, the mission director for this launch. We have anticipated and aspired long enough for this unique moment of exclusively launching 150 satellites in this Aurora rocket. We are at T-1 hour and counting. Over to the launch site, going live with our space reporter, Miss Emily Bathgate. Emily, you are live now.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily, and today we are here at Mawson Lakes Launch Center, waiting on the launch of the Aurora 1 launch vehicle, carrying a constellation of small satellites for 5 different small satellite customers. This launch vehicle is the first of its kind, designed specifically to launch constellations of small satellites. This is the second launch of small satellites for these companies, following the fateful first launch 4 months ago, where a launch failure caused the loss of small satellite payload and the main payload of the launch vehicle, which was a 2-ton communications satellite. This payload is the second iteration of their small satellite design and includes more advanced technology, which will provide these companies more comprehensive and reliable data from space. Due to the fast turnaround of small satellite technologies, these companies can have the best technology in space. We are hopeful for a successful launch and are eagerly awaiting the benefits that these small satellite constellations will provide. It is thrilling to be here at the launch center. The atmosphere is incredibly exciting and all people on site enthusiastically anticipate launch in 30 minutes. Now we are returning to our experts. Back to you.
Thank you, Emily. That was an incredible overview from the launch site. Now, back at the mission control, we have our panel experts, special journalist Dr. Omar Eduardo talking with Juan Carlos, chief engineer of Mexican Space Agency, about the space policy and their program.
Thank you, Ashok. Juan Carlos, thank you very much for coming today with us. Juan Carlos is coming from the Mexican Space Agency. He is the engineer and the director of this small satellite program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daro. My pleasure of being here.
Okay, could you please tell me what is about this project?
Oh, yeah. Let me come to you a little bit about the project we are managing right now. Today is a very, very special day for Mexico. Today we are launching a constellation of 20 small satellites. These satellites are aimed to monitor the weather in Mexico and also to monitor the behavior of an active volcano in Mexico. This will be of really help to Mexican government to respond on a more quickly manner in case we have an emergency. Mm-hmm. How? This will allow us to evacuate the regions, the communities impacted in case the volcano has an eruption or in case there's a hurricane. You know, that's why we are doing this.
That's
today.
very interesting. It sounds very lovely. However, we have some considerations. You know, Mexico has so many issues in terms of, you know, health, security, education. How can you are spending too much money in this project when your country has too much needs?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, I understand you completely. And yeah, Mexico is a country with so many challenges. We have too many things to do yet. But let's think about it just a minute. Education, science, technology, it's not an expense. It's not wasting money. it's an investment.
Okay.
How? Having small satellites
Yes.
is having infrastructure.
Okay.
Having infrastructure requires maintenance, requires development,
Okay.
requires professionals.
Yes.
So we will require education. This education will give us the professionals
Okay.
that will give maintenance and will give a continuity to this kind of project.
Okay.
So there will be more jobs.
Yes.
There will be economic and social wealth in
Yeah.
Mexico. So that's what we are doing. All of this. This is not an expense.
Okay.
This is an investment for the future for the Mexican people.
Actually, this made sense for me. Thank you very much. Okay. How about in terms of politics? Do you think is there any relationship between small satellites and politics?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. Also, if people can see or cannot realize of the effects of or the impact of the space technology, especially the small satellites, into their daily lives, it's even more difficult to see how this impacts politics and how in politics impacts their daily lives. I have a very good example. It's in fact the best example we have in Mexico, and I just have to say that without the small satellites, we wouldn't have a space agency. Mexico wouldn't have its own space agency.
How come?
Yeah, well, it's very simple. 20 years ago, Mexico didn't have a space agency. It was thanks to the development of these small satellites, of these projects in the universities in Mexico, that some professionals, some experts in the field, some opinion leaders started to look at this technology. They called the attention of these experts.
Okay.
And so together, the academy and these opinion leaders pushed together the initiative into the Mexican government to have our own space agency. It took us a while, I have to admit. In fact, the approval of the Mexican Space Agency took a few years, but finally, in 2010, we got to have our own space agency.
I'm very glad to hear that Mexican is leading this industry. And also, have you read the last white paper? You remember
Yeah.
the mission statement say to demonstrate how nations of the global south can leverage the small satellites revolution for their economic benefit. What do you think about this?
Well, I think it makes sense, as I was telling you. This technology is an investment. This will help not only Mexico, but all the countries to have more professionals, to have development. So the results are more development on social and economics. You know, that's.
But do you think it's too ambitious?
I think if you want to make big things, you have to dream big. So
Okay.
that's why we're doing this.
It sounds even better. So we are facing a new revolution.
Yes, we are.
We are facing the revolution of small satellites, which is going to shape 21st century.
Exactly. You're right.
Okay. Okay, Juan Carlos, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for your conversation today.
Oh no, thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you, Eduardo and Carlos. That was a stimulating update on the Mexican small satellite program and the white paper on small satellites. At T-minus 20 minutes and counting, the Aurora 1 getting ready to go, we will now hear from the panel experts. The Chinese satellite manufacturer, Dr. Liu Dong, CEO of Leaf Future, talking with Dr. Bahia Al-Shuaibi, head of the Omani Space Agency, whose small satellites are mounted on top of the rocket and ready to go.
Thank you, Ashok. Good morning.
Good morning, Lou. How
Can
are
you
you?
take a seat?
Thank you.
It's an amazing day, right?
Yes, a few minutes until our Oman Eye constellation will be on the space.
Yes, and it's a 12 satellite constellation. I think with different sensors on board, you can do a lot of applications.
Yeah, exactly.
Agriculture, transportation, water resource, you
course.
name it.
Yeah.
I remember only a few months ago, we were talking about the satellite for the first time. You mentioned it would be used for national security applications. Can you brief me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. As I told you, that's this constellation will help us in national security aspects.
Yeah.
As you can see from Oman map, we have long coast,
Yeah.
and in the north, we want to control our Hormuz Strait to monitor ships and truck ships to come from Oman Gulf to the Arabian Gulf. Also, we have a new industrial park need to focus on it and to see the ships come, commercial ships and airplanes come to that area. Also, we have illegal immigration come from different countries by boats. So we want to track that boats as well. As you can see, we have neighbors here. We want to, with us as a corporation, to check the borders with us.
So the border security is really important for you.
Yeah.
That's why you need to take care of all this area in a very frequent period.
Yeah.
So I think that's why satellite is a really good solution for that. I know many countries in Global South have that issue, have that problem, and they buy images from abroad or other companies.
That's what we did.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really expensive because, especially when you need operational services.
And still, it is not under our control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't have a guarantee of the time for capture, for delivery.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering, how can you come to this stage? I think you mentioned some agency in the United States has inspired you for that?
Yeah, NGA in the United States, it's give us a good example on that. Before, they support large satellites, and they have very long-term contract with a digital globe for large satellites. Yes. And once the small satellites revolution started, they put very good effort on that, and they buy images from different type of small satellites. So NGA inspired us to go ahead with small satellites to provide national security application.
So it seems to me the government agency can be a very good, important buyer in this market. Yeah. And that's why you come here.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, why as a space agency, you choose not to buy image, but to run the operation of the satellites by yourself?
Yeah, comparing with United States or China, we are still young and small country.
See.
And still we don't have such companies that can provide the services between small satellites and the end user. But we are willing on to do that and encourage companies to start these services. But this Constellation, it is a first step for us in the space.
So you have very good reason to operate the satellite constellation.
Yeah.
So in terms of the satellites, you know, there are many big ones. Why do you choose to run a constellation of small satellites? I think because they're cheaper.
Yeah, it is one of the reasons, but there is another reasons. Like, for example, if I want to change any satellites, it will be cheaper rather than the big one.
You don't need 100 million instead of the tens of thousands.
Yeah, and it's also up-to-date technology.
Yes.
So I can be up-to-date technology and change my satellites if I want the new technologies there. Right. And also, it's give us the frequent coverage of our country and our neighbors as well.
That's very important.
Yeah, and it is under our control. And also, the same services that we have it, we can provide it to our neighbors there.
That's good for international cooperation in your region.
Yeah.
And also, you may have customized sensors for different satellites. So, as I mentioned, for different applications. Yes, that's right. So you really don't want to miss the opportunity of small sat revolution.
Yes.
I think as government, as a big buyer with the small sat revolution, you can really get very good benefits for such economy.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think you may have some recommendations for other countries in the Global South.
Yeah. From my experience, I encourage all nations in the Global South to go ahead and build an international cooperation with other countries.
Like we are currently doing?
Yeah. Oman satellites have been built in China's manufacturers, and we launched it here in Australia. Yeah. And also, I encourage all countries and encourage ourselves first, and other countries and all companies to go ahead to build the companies that fill the gap between the small satellites and the end user.
To provide the best service that the customer wants.
Yeah.
It's very nice to chat with you. I think we're looking forward for more cooperation.
Yeah.
Let's say small satellites for telecommunications.
Why not? Looking forward to that. Yeah.
I think we still have some time to go before the exciting launch.
Yes.
Can we have a rest before that?
Yeah, see you later.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Lou.
Thank you, Lou and Bahia. That was a wonderful insight on Oman, an emerging space nation getting cooperation with China on their small satellite program. We are hearing a lot about small satellites. What is a small satellite? Now we have Mr. Sangeet Kumar from Indian Space Agency to explain more about the small satellite program.
Thank you. Good morning. Let us see some facts about small satellites. What is this small satellites? Small satellites are satellites which are low in size and mass. On the screen, we will be seeing the classifications of the small satellites. There are 5 different classifications, starting from mini satellites, which is 100 to 500 kilogram in weight, down to femto satellites, which is even weighs few grams. Why do we need these small satellites? The small satellites are low cost, less lead time to build, and the technological updates makes us easier access to space. Because of this, the small satellites markets tends to grow. It is projected that about 3,000 satellites will be launched in next 5 years. Now, how to launch these small satellites? Traditionally, the small satellites are launched as a secondary payload in the traditional launch vehicle. As you see from the screen, the yellow is the main payload, and down we have some of the small satellites. Here, the traditional launch vehicle are medium lift and heavy lift launch vehicle, which are of high cost and takes long lead time to build. So we need a dedicated launch vehicle for these small satellites. Having seen the launch of the small satellite from the rocket, is there any other way to launch the small satellite? Yes. You can see how beautifully the small satellite is deployed from the International Space Station. So because of the compactness of the small satellites, it can be even launched from the space. The satellite which we see is the Cubesats built by the universities. Now, what is a small satellite? What is a Cubesat? The Cubesat, as the name implies, is a satellite of cubical shape. It is a nano satellite which weighs from 1 to 10 kilogram. Now let us see some components of the Cubesat. It houses a structure which has the elements. The major elements are like solar panel for power generation, and the computer for processing, the antennas for the communication, and the main thing is the payload. It is represented by a unit called U. What is this U? This one U is the size, 10 centimeter in the length, 10 centimeter in the width, and 10 centimeter is height. So the Cubesat is represented like 1U, 1.5U, 2U, and so on. So this is about the small information about the small satellite. Thank you for the patient listening.
Thank you, Sangeet, for the sublime comprehension with your special effects on the small satellites. We are at T-minus 10 minutes. Having heard extensively about the small satellite and the governmental participation at the launch site, we have our special guest from the University of China, Beijing, Dr. Wei Wei, talking with Ms. Tanya, special correspondent, regarding the educational experience of launching high altitude balloon and small satellites. Tanya, you're live now.
Hello, Dr. Mary. Hello, Tanya. Congratulations about your recent launch of the balloon project you said.
Thank you, Tanya.
And tell us why are you here?
As you know, I specialize in high altitude balloon launches, and I have been invited to watch today's launch, so that's why I'm here.
Great. And why your team is working on this project, the high altitude balloon?
Oh, actually, our initial idea was to demonstrate small satellite application. And as you know, it's too expensive to launch a satellite for a university. A balloon is much cheaper and more accessible because most of the components are off the shelf. It's easier to buy, and the high altitude balloon with cameras works like a small satellite for Earth observation, and this means that the university can test many of space applications for small satellites, and we are also able to provide more information to civilians like farmers to help them monitor their crops.
Oh, great. So you mean this balloon was used to provide real-time agricultural information?
Oh, yes, exactly. Actually, we are working in collaboration with agriculture industry now.
Oh, that's a great idea. And tell me, how or what do you think the small satellite technology can provide as a benefit to the agricultural sector?
Our projects prove the importance of smart satellite technologies for agricultural monitoring. Currently, farmers they don't have high resolution information to detect changes earlier, and so they can't respond quickly. So this is broad, untapped market with potential. A smart satellite technology will provide promising outlook to tackle this problem more efficiently.
Okay, so you mean this information can be given to the farmers so they can realize or prevent some problems?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Great. So tell me, what would be the benefit of a university that implements this kind of project?
Actually, it provides us understanding of how to design, launch, and operate a balloon, and also show the potential of smart satellite application, and particularly in source monitoring. And students they have learned lots of tasks, including payload assembly, monitoring, and covering the media detection. All these skills will help them to understand the smart satellite issues, and it also helpful to their study now and in their jobs after their graduation.
Okay, and just to finalize, what would you recommend to the universities that are trying or are interested in this kind of technology or project?
Yeah, for university, it would be very important to develop courses which include building their own smart satellites, and it's also a good way to work with industries to develop new smart satellite technologies.
And let's wait for the lunch.
Okay.
Thank you, Tanya and Weiwei. What a way for the students from a university to build their own satellite technology. The students must be quite thrilled now to see their satellite that they build with their own hands to fly to the space. Now, back at the mission control, we'll prepare for the pre-rocket launch sequence. Aurora 1 mission controllers, listen up guys, give me a go, no go for the launch. Propulsion, communication, telemetry, payload. This is Mars and mission control. We are a go for launch. We are at T-minus 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, ignition sequence launch. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The clock is running. We have a liftoff, and Aurora 1 is through the tower.
GC loop section, close to launch pad operations, secure the pad already, moving close to launch pad operations.
Flight parameters look healthy. Now we are beyond the visual range. After 2 hours, the fairings successfully deployed. Now boosters powering Aurora 1 to the low Earth orbit. The satellite's deployment in the low Earth orbit is successful, guys. Everyone here is remarkably excited. Now the satellites successfully launched and deployed at the mission control. I'm handing over to the panel experts, Mr. Greg Camacho, Director of Philippine Space Agency, talking about their payload that was just launched with senior correspondent Lee.
Hi, Lee. Nice to see you again.
Take a seat.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee. Welcome to AATV. Last year, a big event happened for all the Filipino people. A small satellite called Diwata 1 was launched successfully on March 23. It was the first microsat for Philippines, and also a good example for the revolution of the small satellite. Today, we are going to talk about the Philippine microsat program. We are joined by Greg Camacho.
Thank you, Lee.
And Camacho is a project director of the newly established Philippines National Space Agency. How about you?
I'm okay. And yourself?
I'm great. Today, I see many small satellite players are coming here to join us. So, can you tell us something about your program?
Of course. So the Philippine National Microsatellite Program was launched in 2015. It is a 3-year program, and last year, as you mentioned, we launched our first microsat called the Diwata 1. And I'm very excited right now because our second microsat, the Diwata 2, is actually on its way to space on board the Aurora 1, and I'm feeling very relieved about that.
It's very nice. It's important. In last month, it's important that the Diwata 1 was circled the Earth 4,000 times. It's a great number. So, can you tell us more about why you launched the satellite?
So last year, CNN published a report saying that the Philippines was the world's 4th most disaster-prone country. Around 20 typhoons hit the country every year on average.
It's terrible.
And as you can see in this picture, in 2013, Typhoon Haiyan, which is the strongest typhoon in recorded history, hit the country and affected the lives of more than 16 million Filipinos. So we just needed a better way of handling our disasters.
It's a very good program, I think. But somebody might think that you should use the money for more urgent matters, like food security and infrastructure. What do you think about it?
I think you bring up a very interesting point. We did encounter some public perception problems because the benefits from a microsatellite program are not as instant as, say, an urban feeding program. So what we had to do was keep stressing that the benefits would be long-term.
So what are these benefits?
Firstly, the cost to develop a microsatellite is much less than it would have cost for a traditional large satellite. So economically, it was easier to justify. What the microsatellite does is uses its sensors and cameras to send us information and pictures like this one. And we use that information for weather prediction and for post-disaster relief support. It helps us assess the amount of damage that an area sustains and lets us know which areas need more resources. So 20 years ago, that was impossible.
I think so. Now we know the small satellites are taking down the high barrier to the space industry. Many emerging countries are able to join the space club. So, can you give some recommendations to them, to the emerging countries?
I think cooperation is very important.
Yeah.
In our case, we sent our national university students to our partner universities in Japan, and that's where they learned how to develop and operate the microsatellites. I think it's important for emerging countries to partner with developed space nations, because these nations will provide infrastructure, resources, and knowledge transfer. The second thing is, I think a country needs to establish a national space agency as the main...
Like the Philippines.
Yeah, I mean, that just happened pretty recent. I think a country needs a point person for all the interested businesses and countries.
Yeah.
It needs the agency to manage its priorities and resources. and it prevents developments from doing simultaneous activities. Finally, I think a country needs a curriculum for space education. So we need to get kids excited. We need to develop the next batch of space scientists, engineers, astronauts.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? The next Neil Armstrong might even come from your country.
That would be great. Maybe you can be the next one to Mars.
Maybe?
Yeah. That's small steps for Greek. A grand leap for the Philippines. Okay, one more question.
Yep.
Why is the satellite called Diwata?
So Diwata is a word in Filipino that means fairy with special powers. And if you think about it, the microsatellite allows us Filipinos to watch over the Earth as if we were flying over it. It allows us to predict the weather as if we were looking into the future. And it allows us to save the lives of people as if we were superheroes.
Oh.
So yeah, if you think about it, Diwata 1 gives us superpowers.
Oh, that's very interesting. So now you have 3 fairies now, together with your girlfriend. We know the small satellites are helping more and more emerging countries enter the field of space. I agree with you. Cooperation is very important. Countries should develop regional and international partnerships. The goal is to provide everyone access to social, economic benefit to space. Finally, may I have a request?
Surely.
When you go to Mars, please bring me a ticket.
I have to check about that, but sure.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Lee.
I'm Lee. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Greg and Lee. That is a sensational perception into Mexican space program and cooperation between the emerging countries. We are hearing a lot about the governmental cooperations. What does the commercial space industry have to say? Therefore, I hand over the floor to 2 young entrepreneurs from the space sector, Ms. Lydia Zhang from Space Technologies and Mr. Patrick from Launch Company to take over the floor.
Thank you, Ashok. Satellites. You must be really proud being the founder of a racing space startup company.
Thank you, Patrick. You're right. It's been a long way to stand here and watch my satellites float in space. How's your company going?
It's great, thank you. I'm really proud of our long-standing cooperations. With the sensors my company produces linked via your satellites, we're on the best way to revolutionize the Internet of Things.
Exactly. We will provide machine-to-machine linkage to remote areas. For example, farmers using your sensors would have plenty of information at their fingertips, which will greatly increase their operational efficiency.
I agree. With the amount of arable land being finite, our contribution to precision agriculture is helping feeding the growing world's population.
Though our potential customer base is not just limited to agriculture, as we also have this market in the defense and mining industry. With our brilliant business ideas, we're appealing to people by providing free service. The way we profit from it is by issuing licenses and provide data linked to companies like yours that produce sensors, which means our customers, they only need to purchase the sensors for once and can enjoy the information service for free afterwards, making this technology affordable for developing.
These countries don't have the advantage of a broad telecommunications coverage. That's why your idea of using satellites to provide these linkages is the way to go. And by using small satellites instead of the traditional big ones, the cost savings are huge.
Yes, just think about that. A fraction of the traditional conventional big satellites.
And the shortened production time.
Exactly. Given the size and mass, we're able to shorten the time of building and launching our satellite to several months. And also, all the components are off the shelf, standardized, and readily available. That's pretty cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Remember, 10 years ago when you founded your company, the private space sector was just in its infancy. Only a few companies were testing the waters. I remember you spent a lot of time researching, developing connections, but that all paid off once you started the funding process.
Yes, those good old days. I remember my partner and I living our lives in the office for weeks. But you're right, the government funding program was just the first important step of raising millions from venture capital, which then allowed us to build and launch our satellites.
How long did that process take you? 1 year?
Yes, 1 year, from receiving funding to launch.
But launching that first satellite allowed you to secure the necessary transmission frequencies from the International Telecommunications Union.
Exactly, you're right. But in the past, it was really hard to find the right launching opportunity. But with the rise of the commercial launching companies, the cost of launching a constellation of small satellites have dropped significantly.
Your success has led to an impressive expansion of your company. How big is your workforce now?
Well, we started off with a group of 5, and we're now a big family of 100 employees.
It's impressive and very encouraging, Lydia.
Thank you. Yeah, we're also seeing more talents join the private space sector from various backgrounds. You know, it's almost like ISU. People come from different backgrounds, different culture. Remember the good days we spent at Molson Lake in SHSSP17?
Oh yes, I really miss those times.
Yeah, me too.
With the successful deployment of your satellites today, Lydia, what are your thoughts about the future?
Well, my motto has always been, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Good to see you.
Thank you, Lydia and Patrick. That was a marvelous and exciting update on the new and upcoming small satellite enterprise and the ISU UniSA SHSSP program. The price of this successful rocket launch session is hard work, dedication, determination, and adaptation of the whole team in a relatively shorter duration of the past 5 weeks at the ISU. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Aurora 1 launch team from the University of South Australia Mission Control, I would like to extend my thanks and delightful regards to everyone here to make this launch session successful. This is Dr. Ashok Narayanamurthy signing off as Medical Mission Director.
So thank you to the University of South Australia and the International Space University for helping us with that successful launch and satellite deployment. We've also heard today from our panel experts, our decision makers and our stakeholders from the satellites that were launched. And what we can see is the small satellite revolution is truly here. Advancements in technology and innovation have lowered barriers and presented many opportunities for nations of the global south. They're now in a position to make use of endless satellite applications and reap the benefits. If we look at the recommendations from today, we can see that they can be categorized into 4 sections. And those 4 sections to be considered by nations of the global south are, number 1, policy change. Nations of the global south or emerging space nations need to posture themselves from a policy and governance point of view to maximize the engagement at both a national and regional level with the global space community. Number 2 is education. Educational institutions are the backbone of innovation. Educational stakeholders should engage with students at all levels and give them the ability to create the next cutting-edge technology. Number 3 is government. Governments should promote the synergies between themselves, industry, and academia in order to promote socio-economic good. And number 4 is private enterprise. Private enterprise should engage with markets to foster that next iteration in the small satellite revolution. Today we've barely scratched the surface of the small satellite revolution with our white paper and the presentation, and it's what we have done though is we've equipped the decision makers from the global south and anyone else who reads our white paper with the tools to go and make the right decisions about participating in the small satellite revolution. Before you leave today, I'd like to get you to consider this. What are you going to do and who are you going to talk to when you leave the presentation in order to take advantage of the small satellite revolution? thank you very much. That's the end of our presentation today. So now we have the opportunity for a question and answer session. We have up to 30 minutes. We will have 2 microphones to give to the person asking the question and to the person answering the question. I'll moderate, so if you could direct your questions at me and we'll take it from there. So, do we have any questions? Yes, Dr. Graziella.
Thank you and congratulations. This was great. Clearly, there is also an aspirational element to the small satellite revolution. We've heard in all of the interviews that we have learned about all these new emerging countries in space using small satellites in order then to step up to something which is bigger, even landing Greg on Mars, for example. So how do you see the small satellite revolution, in terms of, how you're going to approach the small satellite revolution so that then you can also implement that further step to go out into space?
Okay, well, it's definitely aspirational, and I'm pretty sure all our participants are here today because we have those aspirations. Lawrence, would you like to take that?
So the small satellite revolution, I consider, and we consider, to be sort of a step in the value chain of the space industry. So not everyone can enter into the space industry and launch people to Mars. So what's important is to have these small steps along the way that you can deliver on. So we see the small satellite revolution as just the first stepping stone, and that way you can build the infrastructure, build knowledge, build the expertise, and all of those international collaborations, so that 10, 20 years down the track, it's easy for you to update it into a full-blown space agency.
How was that? Yes, a follow-up.
No, that was excellent. Of course, you need to have a stepping stone. On the other hand, if you look at the countries that are already going to Mars, they didn't have that small satellite stepping stone. So what kind of argument would you then use to convince people, for example, in your countries, the policymakers, that this small satellite revolution is the necessary stepping stone? Why not try directly a big mission collaborating with the big agencies that are already there?
Well, like I said, you can't, as a small nation, you can't just jump up to a big space agency. So, sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah. Yes, Flavia, you had a question?
I have a question, something I really like, this is STEM, so education, because you did a couple of recommendations how, to involve this nation from young age. There is one thing that came out in my mind when I read the white paper, and as well now. All these countries of the global south do have different educational systems. So the STEM level of Australia might be different in Africa or Asia, and I tell you, it's really different. So if you look at STEM involvement, how it's managed in different countries, you'll be surprised, okay, how some countries are really well developed, and some countries, I'm afraid, like ours, is less. Have any of you looking into that a bit more deeply? Do you have any recommendation on how one country compared to the other handle this, and how we can improve it?
Okay. Let me hand over to Greg.
Thanks for your question, Flavia. I think it was a really good one. So a couple of months ago, I did a workshop in Kathmandu in Nepal. And for 10 days, we had to develop a curriculum for space education for kids in middle school. So the company was called Karkana, and what they did was they approached it in 2 main ways. So the first way was they would develop a weekend workshop for kids. So this would be a season of maybe around, I think, 1 month to 2 months, where the kids would come over and they would teach them about coding, possibly about thinking about ideas. And the other way was they partnered with the government to go to public schools and actually do workshops as well. So the government would allot them, I think, 1 session every week. So they would go there and then teach the kids about, like back then, they didn't have the space curriculum yet. But right now, I've been updated and they're doing the space education thing. And yeah, so I think there are a lot of channels through which you can do STEM education through space. And what I found there was that platforms like Ardusat, for example, or Arduino, are actually making it accessible for these governments, for these kids, to gain access to knowledge about space.
And just to add to that, there are companies, for example, in Australia like Launchbox and CubeWriter, which provide STEM kits, I think, based on these types of technologies. So it's accessible to the students. And I know as a student, space was very aspirational to me. So if I was in school today, to be able to work on a either coding or putting together a little satellite would be amazing.
Conrad, in the next decade, there's going to be an unprecedented number of small sats being launched into low Earth orbit. How do you anticipate the saturation of low Earth orbit is going to impact the small satellite industry?
Okay, so I think you're referring to space debris, or just not enough space?
Space debris, not enough space. Being able to communicate so that there is no creation of much more orbital debris that's going to, kind of saturate the market completely. So, can you guys discuss maybe a little bit about the aspects, how that's going to be in the future, when there's going to be thousands and thousands of satellites in the limited space?
Okay, that's definitely a challenge. Bahia?
Pushing or pulling these satellites from the debris. So nowadays they're working in two ways to reduce, to bring up or push up the debris there in the space. And the new technology of satellites that's ahead, it is like to reducing, because every satellite, they will take and have responsibility to make their satellite down or pushing them away. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's a portion about the orbital debris, but the space itself, I think, is going to be saturated enough. There's going to be much more coordination between people launching satellites. We're going to be having thousands, probably tens of thousands of satellites in limited space. So I think some discussions in terms of, like we do, for example, with aviation, air control. So it has to be some elements of that to prevent the vast amount of satellites that will be taking the same space. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
We'll get Eduardo to add to that.
I think it's very important to have some kind of regulation, and this is part of the international politics, to have some kind of agreements and to get some kind of register, to register all the satellites that are going to the space. So we have register and we have some policies and some agreements is going to facilitate and to avoid this, congested space.
Just as Omar suggested, there will be vertical and horizontal stacking in the space, so that we have enough positions for the small satellites we launch. As of now, we have with the stacking technique, we have enough space for thousands of satellites in the orbit.
Yes.
First of all, let me congratulate with all the organizers here. University of South Australia, International Space University, to do this. Very amazing. It's the first time that I'm following with Michael and, from the beginning. I would like to highlight an aspect that I think is very important in this context, and that is the international collaboration. As you already highlight in your simulation, there are areas where the international collaboration is very strong, like Europe, the European Space Agency, but also in a country like Oman or the Emirates, where there are resources and experts from all over the world to share idea and project in that particular area. My question is to you. You are more or less 40 people from all over the world, and you bring back some amazing experience about these months here in Adelaide. What do you think in terms of this experience in the next future? Because I imagine that in a couple of years you will be employee in your space agency. So I think that this relationship that is started in this month today is be very important in the future for you in order to be connection around the world. I really would like to have your feedback about this experience, but not in terms of what's happened today, what could happen in the future.
Okay. Someone want to, Jessica? Could you repeat the question?
So what do you think about this experience in terms of international collaboration where you will be involved in your activity? Correct, the second part.
Our experience in the industry in the future. There's a lot of policy restrictions and international restrictions, like particularly sort of trade regulations, and that's something that are restricting collaboration at the moment. But if maybe countries of the global south that aren't as sort of restricted by those demonstrated collaboration, maybe that would pave the way for more collaboration on a wider scale in the future. Does that answer the question?
Just to add to that, I think also the very nice personal connections we made here helped a lot. Like, for example, all our Chinese colleagues and the Indian colleagues, they made the Chinese Space Agency and the Indian Space Agency, which don't seem as approachable if you just look from it from an outside perspective. But now that we have the personal connections, I think it will help a lot in the future. Just maybe skip the official ways and know, like, oh, I know a guy in the Chinese Space Agency, or Siam in the Indian Space Agency, maybe the future boss of the Filipino Space Agency. I think it will help a lot in future collaborations.
And look, for me, coming here, I'm from Perth. There's not a very big space industry there. We're more mining and oil and gas. And I'm also an aspiring entrepreneur. So what I've taken from the ISU is that while in Perth I may feel a little bit isolated, I now have access to the world through the alumni from ISU. And what that's made me realize is that in order to, for example, start a business, and not so much from a government or policy point of view, but just from a commercial point of view, I need to engage with those entities elsewhere in the world, whether they're government, educational, or private industry. So I think the space industry is very international, and it's something that we'll just have to keep in mind and make sure we have those connections in order to progress. Yes, Jeff.
Thank you. I think I'm convinced that it's a really good idea that small satellites form part of activities that countries should do. But when you want to make a big difference, or you want to accelerate the introduction, it's more than the good feeling that I'm going to need for that. What are the steps that you could see? What are the most immediate steps that you can see that would make the biggest difference to take a step change to get that big shift that you want? It's not just the odd university and the odd entrepreneur. How do we create the step function within a very short period of time? What are some really key actions that you think you could take?
Before I hand it over to someone, I would say one of the uses of a small satellite is to fill in the gap. So there are often things that the larger satellites can't do, and often you may not need the high quality or the detail of a larger satellite. So perhaps one way to start this, and there are many things to consider as you pointed out, is to show that small satellites for a small cost can provide just enough information to give you just enough ability to do what it is you need to do, and that may start to show a benefit, a cost-effective benefit, and maybe from there we can move on to try bigger and better things. Does anyone else have a?
So, as with anything you want to introduce into a company, into a country, I think it starts with public perception, and it starts with educating people. So one of the ways that we've structured our white paper is to introduce these recommendations in sort of stages that can address small, medium, and large enterprises within the education, government, and private sectors. So some of the recommendations we've made is beginning to engage the community in the benefits and to increase public understanding, to get into the educational system early on. Like we spoke about, small sats are a great educational tool, and we want to try and get those into high schools and primary schools and universities. And lastly, we want to try and encourage these small entrepreneurs, the low-level businesses, to create software and technologies to assist existing small satellite operators to bring this information to the public and make them more aware.
Jessica, you had a comment?
Just to add to that, I think the benefit with the small sats in terms of getting a nation access to space is that you tailor the small sat or the small sat constellation to a particular application. So, for instance, the Philippines is looking specifically at disaster monitoring and post-disaster management. And so, along with what Lauren said, engaging the community, your community can start to see a direct correlation between the benefits of having some kind of space industry and benefits to their community. So I think that's a key step in that sort of chain of getting your country engaged in the space sector.
Okay, I think just one more follow-up to that. Carlos?
Following what Lawrence and Jessica were saying, also a very important step is to make aware the government that this kind of technology is truly beneficial for entire community, for entire nation. Doing this, the government will establish the adequate policies to encourage entrepreneurship, to make this industry start walking forward. So that's besides public opinion and education, the policies and the opinion of the awareness of the government sector is very important for a nation to develop this kind of technology.
Thank you, Carlos. Flavi?
There is something, can you hear me? Yeah, I've got in mind since I read a white paper and I'm hearing a lot of it, okay? There is an important factor in the countries we are discussing, so the global south. So it's not just about the government engagement, of course it is, okay? But it's also a giant problem of affordability for the end user, okay? So the reason why, it's hard to have internet in many countries, or telecommunication used in Africa, it's not because we cannot put a satellite on top of these countries. It's a problem how I'm gonna buy the service. Okay, so yes, we can discuss about that the satellites itself are cheaper, okay, or low cost for a country, but I don't think that's the key factor. So for example, you put a list of small satellites from 500 kilograms to 1, okay? Oh, this is a giant list, because a 500 kilograms constellation is quite expensive, not as a nanosatellite constellation, right? So what it comes down to is also, can the end user buy the service? Because I can promise you right now, some American companies like, you know, O3B that we discussed in the past with you guys during lectures, they fail to do that. Okay, so how do you see this? Have you considered that actually at the end of the day is that community in Africa or the community in India that needs connectivity, that needs to buy the service? How is this going to look like? Can they afford it? It's a 500 kilogram satellite, may be able to provide such a cheap service? This is really important, because at the end of the day, as you guys are saying, it's all about end users and what we can do for them. So if they cannot buy the service, it's finished. And I tell you, the big gap for 500 kilometer satellites Constellation to 1 kilogram Constellation, it makes the end service cost very different. So how do you see this?
So
are you well aware of these affordability issues in the countries?
I think you've kind of alluded to this, and what's really important is the customer. Whether it's private enterprise doing something, educational institutes doing something, or the government, the customer has to be kept in mind. Now, private enterprise, the customer tends to be end users, but it could be the government as well. From a government perspective, who's their customer? It's the taxpayer. And from an educational point of view, who would the customer be? Well, it's likely that it's their students, as they want to attract students to their institution. From a business perspective, or from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think it's relevant to take that perspective and apply it to all of those sectors, and that is, you need to build something that people are going to use or buy. So you will have to speak to them. You need to go out and do your market research. Having a fancy piece of satellite technology, whether it's a tiny pocket cube satellite or a giant mini satellite, it doesn't matter. It's the end service. So I would recommend, at least from myself, and we can ask our participants their view, but educational institutions, governments and private enterprise need to make sure they understand who their customer is. For example, you know, if you're wanting a farmer to get some kind of connectivity because they need to monitor their livestock, and they have a lot of livestock, you're not going to put a $10 device on each piece of cattle, for example. You'd be looking at, yes, millions of dollars. So it needs to be, whoever is doing that, I'm sure they would have had the conversations both with the customer but also with the technology side of things to make sure that they marry up and you can get something that is, I guess, cheap, for want of a better word, but also fits that need. Are there any other comments from the participants?
Flavia, I think that's a really good question, and obviously you've been listening, and one of the things we're taking home from this white paper is that we still don't know all the answers, and we want to use this as a way to stimulate discussion so we can solve problems like you're talking about. But to bring it back to what we've been discussing, this is why the investment in education, investment in entrepreneurship and innovation is so important. Because remember, we came down from large satellites, which are multi-billion-dollar projects, down to million-dollar projects for our small satellites. So if we take the time and have the clear forethought to invest again and again and to have more international collaboration and share our expertise with the world, I think we can definitely bring down the cost of these services so that the whole world can benefit. And it's great that there's companies out there like Fleet and like OneWeb who have sort of a world vision, and they're going to use that vision to hopefully drive this innovation and bring all the benefits to the global south.
Lou?
To add a little bit to that, I think in business the affordability is about the scale effect. So how can we reach the scale effect by using small satellite? I think we have some hint in our white paper. We identified 4 issues for global south, and telecommunication is one of them. It is the issue that everybody needs, even for now. So I think for the future, small sat can be used for telecommunication and in the scale effect for the affordability of everybody on Earth. Internet of Things,
Thank you,
Internet,
really smart. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Michael, and then Bill.
Congratulations on a fantastic presentation. One of the big challenges that we've become aware of in this country, but also equally in any other part of the world, is that a small satellite can cause just as much damage in orbit if it collides with another object as a large satellite. And this means that the government of the country of launch, or the country of the satellite owner, is liable for that damage internationally. And most governments pass on that liability to the satellite owner. Now, this is a new industry with mainly involving younger entrepreneurs and universities, and none of those players have the financial resources to normally indemnify the government against that sort of risk. In Australia, we have been able to persuade the government to actually absorb that risk for at least one launch of experimental Cubesats for scientific purposes. Have you given any thought to this problem? Because it is probably one of the biggest barriers to the further development of a commercial small satellite industry in any part of the world.
Okay. Scott, would you like to make that?
That is a huge problem, or a huge consideration that does need to be taken into account commercially and on a national level. Another big issue that can run in tandem with that is how are these disputes resolved when they do occur, whether they're resolved according to international regulations or on a domestic level. There will need to be some sort of further international cooperation or discussion in relation to these issues, because I imagine that is a huge barrier for upcoming entrepreneurs and commercial enterprises wanting to pursue this. The white paper doesn't address this particular issue, but it is a question that does need to be explored further.
So it's something for us to look into. Bill?
Thank you. Will we still need large satellites in the future? Now, we've heard a lot of great information today about small satellites and the benefits, very nicely presented, but presumably there are still some areas where small satellites have got limitations. Could you say something in general terms about the specifications or you know, the limitations in terms of is it resolution of pixels, or is it bit rates, or just what are the areas that are going to separate small and large satellites in the future?
Okay. Bahir?
Still, we will need the large satellites. For example, for TV, for convince also some countries to have, because some countries, they said still we need the large satellites. So nowadays we can also put the small satellites in geo orbit, like what ESA did, and providing some application and services. But of course, I think both of them, large and small satellites, should work together to provide a complete picture of the services to provide it to the customer. And of course, as you're asking about the limitation of small satellites, they can't, for example, provide the continuous connection, for example, we can say it, or providing TV application. And for that, we need the large satellites. And as you said, also sometimes for the pictures. But we have also on the other hand, we have some examples, very good examples, that small satellites provide also very good resolution of the images. And I think both of them, they should work together. Like even the large satellites can support the small satellites, and small satellites support large satellites to provide even different services, or also providing the same service at the same time.
I think Carlos had a comment as well. Thank you, Bahir.
Thanks, hey Bill. Giving a follow-up to Bahir's comment, also these limitations of mass, of size of the small satellites can be like resumed in the capacity of the number of applications that a single small satellite can carry on, and also the kind of equipment that the small satellite can carry on to the space. And these these factors are limited only by the size and the weight of the satellite. I think as per the technology keeps going and progressing, this kind of barriers will be broken, since the miniaturization and the more specific, or the more how can I say it? Yeah, the more specific the equipment will be each time smaller and smaller, and as per in the future, these small satellites will be able to carry this kind of very specific equipment that nowadays is very heavy or is very big, and that in the future also these satellites can be addressed, like the constellations can also carry on multiple kind of applications instead of only one, which is kind of the actual status of the technology. But yeah, those are the kind of the resume of the summary of the limitations.
And I guess while it's hard to predict the future, in my, well, not in my pocket, but on the desk over there is a computer, which is way smaller than the computer I first bought, and I'm sure it's way smaller than the computer many people in the room have used years and years ago. So I can only imagine in 10, 20, 30 years time, technology may have advanced so much that maybe we don't need the large satellites anymore. But it's an exciting thing to contemplate. Yes.
Thanks. Ian Cartwright, Defence Science Technology Group. I'd just like to continue on the theme that Flavia and Michael opened up with, which is risk. The SpaceWorks market forecasts showed that they're expecting growth in small satellites over the coming years, even though the last couple of years we've actually seen a downturn because of launch availability. Other than the aspects of a poor business model, what other risks do you see leading to the hype of small satellites simply vanishing?
Covered this in detail.
I suppose apart from, like you said, poor business models, the risk is, like we've seen the downturn recently because of a number of launch failures. We've lost something like 88 small satellites in the past 12 months. So that's definitely a risk to the industry. But I think because small satellites can be built so quickly and they're quite easily replaceable because they're made from off-the-shelf components, the risk is considerably less than, say, if we lost a big 2-ton, 3-ton satellite. I'm not a business person, so I'm not sort of as familiar with the risks.
Eduardo will...
I remember that we had a conference with what's the name? From America, who was the father of the small satellite. What is his name? I can't remember.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Jordan.
So he said something very interesting. He said that we are in this process of failure. So he didn't say that we are be 100%, get the success. This is a process that at the beginning he expected that it's going to be a lot of failure, as anything in life. Maybe after 20 or 30 years, maybe we can reach more. After we learn more, we get more technology. will be much better at this point.
Okay. Scott?
So perhaps not on a business sense of the risks of small satellite revolution not proceeding as large as we may have thought. The limitations that I can see in relation to outside of the business model are the fight for frequency allocation and distribution, which will jump largely, hugely, or exponentially with the amount of more satellites and more players wishing to get small satellites into orbit. And as Michael touched on, the liability is a huge issue as well. Both these aspects can be not solved, but there's private opportunity there for businesses to get involved. The third liability or a risk to the revolution not picking up as quick as we've highlighted in the paper would be the method of dispute resolution for when things do go wrong with small satellites. If there is a collision or there's damage or agreements aren't kept, how are these disputes resolved in an international forum, as they're usually international players or companies from different nations? And how do you enforce the regulations that they've all signed up to and offer a form of punishment? Those are the risks that I see.
Okay, we have time for one more question, but okay, well, Lou will continue.
Just to follow up, I think the space industry is the most risk-sensitive industry in the world. So when you do the business in this industry, you will see people are really sensitive in risks. They know more risk than everybody else. On the other hand, it's the business that you cannot do like 10 years ago with 5 people. So you have more chance to risk and to get opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Lou. So we have time for one more question, and don't worry if you can't ask your questions in this last go. You'll be able to speak to us outside later. Omar? Okay, I see. After Omar, we'll take some questions from social media.
My question is actually more on policy and its relation to technology. So the more we get in the future, the more sensitive the video imaging is, the pictures, the resolution, and the cost. So more people be able to launch private small satellites into space and be able to have unprecedented access to people, privacy, and so on. Could you elaborate more about the policy changes that we'll like to take into the future to address the privacy concerns?
So, Loris, do you want to?
So, the impact of the small satellite revolution has not been lost on the international community. The United Nations has produced a very informative handbook on what small satellite players need to consider regarding their international obligations. So I think the point you make is important. So this is why domestic policy is so important, because that allows, it puts in a framework whereby these small private non-government entities within nations, the domestic policy puts in place how they are supposed to meet the international international requirements. So domestic policy just needs to be implemented, and that makes these small companies accountable. And we need to move forward that way.
And I'm sure there's a long way to go with that. If we could take a question from social media.
Into the utilization of satellites and their data and the benefit.
So the question is non-space sectors, so traditional industries or other industries, how to engage with them so that they will make use of either space technology or information or data. We'll go to Ashok.
Medical industry is one of a non-space sector industry, and we have like a lot of problems in remote areas accessing to adequate health care even though there are some doctors and paramedical personnel, there is a difficulty in getting specialists and opinions at a relatively shorter duration. I would guess like telemedicine and telehealth would be very useful, and it has been successfully implemented in pilot programs, but the countries, especially the global south, should think about it. For example, in a remote part of India, like if there is a surgical complication and we have we don't have a surgeon at that facility, we can, through the satellite industry, like we can get the relevant opinions from a radiologist or a relevant opinion from a surgeon. He can just guide the physician over there to go over the life-saving procedure, and then the patient can be transferred to a better healthcare facility. This is just one example of non-space industry utilizing the space industry.
I'll pass you to Lou.
Thank you, Conrad. And I want to generalize a little bit that for the non-sector, it's a very good thing that you are the real customer. So you know more than anybody else what you need from space. So that's the opportunity from the small satellite, that you can do your business on your own and feed your business on your own, then much better than anybody else.
Let me just take you over to Jessica.
Just to add to that, I think the key to showing these non-space sector industries how space can benefit them is to use demonstrations. So, for instance, our high-altitude balloon was a very low-cost demonstration of how satellites could benefit the agricultural industry. So rather than building a whole fleet of satellites and being like, we can do this for you, we show them a cheap, sort of not quite as good version to begin with, and show them this is the potential benefits, and that will encourage these non-space sector industry companies to invest in space. I think, yeah, demonstrations are key.
Okay, and I think if you're an entrepreneur, go and talk to anyone in any industry, and you may just find a use for space technology and information that no one's thought of before. So we've come to the end of our question and answer section. I'd like to say that on behalf of the participants, we are very happy and grateful to have you here to listen to us and hopefully understand what we've been saying. I think the questions show that I think we're on the right track, and the hard work has I think it's paid off. So I think we're all quite happy. I am, and so thank you, and thank you to University of South Australia and International Space University for making this possible for us. I would like to now hand over to Dr. Graziella Caparelli to say a few words.
Thank you so much. What I can say, but wow, you guys were fantastic. So I will give all of you a very inspirational speech tomorrow when you actually graduate. But I first of all want to congratulate anyway. You made excellent progress on this issue of the small satellites. You put it forth in a very concise, clear and logical manner. Yes, there are questions to be answered still. Not everything is answerable in such a short time frame, but you framed the issue. And I think that was very important. So thank you so much. The presentation today was fantastic. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I think of the three that I have been, this is the best that I've seen. So thank you so much for that. I have now just a few items of housekeeping. So you participants, i.e. all of my students, you are supposed to stay here and talk to Brenton Danzi, who is representing the University of South Australia, and you will talk with him about, in private and confidentially, about your experience here, what can be improved, if you had any concerns, and he will be listening and will make sure that with the feedback we can improve. Also, tell him something nice about us if you have something nice to say. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. All of the examiners, I mean all of the people over there who look like, you know, they have been reserved the seats for, you have to join Juan and David and myself upstairs now for the examiner's briefing so that we can finalize the grade. It's just a formality, I'm sure. And then everybody else, all of our guests, please step outside. There will be refreshments. And when the rest of us have done with all our duties, we will be all joining you. And after that, there is also, I am told, a barbecue lunch at 12:30 in Mawson Lake Central. And I think everyone is invited to that as well for those of you who can stay. Again, thank you so much. This was awesome. Thanks a lot.